I should have known that desperation makes fools of us all. But on that gray November afternoon in 1878, when I stood before the brass plaque reading Dr. Cornelius Thorne, Experimental Psychology and Physiological Sciences, I told myself I was being brave. The advertisement had appeared in the back pages of the Times, modest and clinical. Healthy female subjects needed for groundbreaking memory research. Compensation provided, discretion assured. I had torn it from the newspaper with trembling fingers, the ink smudging against my worn gloves. 3 months behind on my lodging house rent, and 2 days away from losing even my cramped corner room, I had little choice but to answer. London pressed around me with all its familiar weight. Smoke curled from 1,000 chimneys, blending with the fog until the city seemed to exist in perpetual twilight. Carriages clattered past on the cobblestones, their wheels throwing up dirty water that splashed against my already muddy hem. I clutched my reticule tighter and climbed the steps to the narrow townhouse tucked between a solicitor's office and a boarding house for respectable widows. The door opened before I could knock. A severe woman in black bombazine examined me with pale, calculating eyes. Her hair was pulled back so tightly that it seemed to stretch the skin of her face, making her expression unreadable. She said nothing, only stepped aside to let me enter. The entrance hall smelled of carbolic acid and something else, something metallic and strange that caught in the back of my throat. Gas lamps flickered along the walls, their light reflecting off dark wood paneling and framed anatomical drawings that made me look away quickly. The woman gestured toward a door at the end of the hall, then disappeared into the shadows as silently as she had appeared. I walked forward, my footsteps muffled by a threadbare carpet. My heart hammered against my corset stays. I was a typist, nothing more. I spent my days transcribing legal documents in a counting house where the senior clerk watched me with eyes that lingered too long on my neck and wrists. I was nobody, unremarkable, the kind of woman London swallowed without noticing. What could a man of science possibly want with someone like me? The door opened before I reached it. A man stood in the doorway, younger than I had expected, perhaps 35, with dark hair touched with premature silver at the temples. He wore a well-tailored suit, but his collar was slightly askew, and ink stained his right hand. His eyes were remarkable, a startling gray-green that seemed to look through me rather than at me. "You are Miss Winters," he said. His voice was cultured, but roughened by what sounded like exhaustion, or perhaps grief. "Please come in." The room beyond was part study, part laboratory. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling, their spines cracked and worn from constant use. A large desk dominated one corner, buried under papers covered in dense handwriting and complex diagrams. But it was the machine in the center of the room that drew my eye and held it. It stood perhaps 6 feet tall, a confusion of brass cylinders, glass tubes filled with clear liquid, and wires that connected to what looked like a metal crown or helmet. 2 chairs faced each other on either side of the device, both fitted with similar crowns attached by cables to the central apparatus. The whole thing hummed with a low, almost musical vibration that I felt in my bones. Dr. Thorne closed the door behind me. He did not offer me a seat, but moved instead to the machine, running his hand along one of the brass cylinders with something approaching tenderness. "You are wondering what it does," he said. "I am wondering if I should leave," I replied, surprising myself with my honesty. He turned to look at me then, really look at me, and I saw something flicker in those unusual eyes. Pain, perhaps, or recognition of a fellow desperate soul. "You answered the advertisement because you need money," he said. It was not a question. "I need someone with no family, no close connections, someone who will not be immediately missed if something goes wrong. Your application suggested you fit those requirements perfectly." The bluntness should have frightened me. Instead, I found it oddly comforting. At least he was honest about what I was to him. A commodity. A subject. Someone expendable. "What does it do?" I asked. He moved closer, and I caught the scent of tobacco and something chemical, like the developing fluid photographers used. Up close, I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the shadows beneath them that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "It records memory," he said. "Human memory, translated into electrical impulses, captured in solution, preserved. I have been working on this for 7 years. I have tested it on animals, on cadavers, on myself. But I need to know if it works between two living human minds. I need to know if memory can be transferred." His intensity frightened me more than the machine did. This was a man possessed by his work, consumed by it. I had seen that look before, in the face of a woman at the lodging house who had lost her child and spent her days sewing tiny clothes for a baby who would never wear them. Grief, I thought. He was grieving something, or someone. "How does it work?" I asked. "You would sit here." He indicated one of the chairs. "I would place the recording crown on your head. You would think about a memory, any memory, something vivid and complete. The machine would capture the electrical patterns of that thought, preserve them. Then I would sit in the other chair and we would reverse the process. Your memory would be transferred to me. I would experience what you experienced, see what you saw, feel what you felt. The implications made my head spin. To share memory like sharing a photograph, to make experience transferable, recordable. It was astounding. It was terrifying. "What if something goes wrong?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "Then I would compensate your landlady for your belongings and arrange for a decent burial." I should have run. Any sensible woman would have run. But I thought of the counting house, of the senior clerk's hands brushing against my waist as he passed behind my desk, of the landlady's cold eyes when I asked for more time, of the long, slow slide into poverty that awaited women like me who had no family and no prospects. I thought of dying slowly in a workhouse or a charity hospital, unmourned and forgotten. At least this would be quick, and perhaps, in some small way, meaningful. "How much?" I asked. £5 if you survive unharmed. £10 to your chosen beneficiary if you do not. £10 was more than I earned in 3 months. It was a fortune to someone like me. And if I died, well, the landlady would at least get something for the trouble of disposing of my things. "I accept," I said. He studied my face as if memorizing it, or perhaps as if trying to understand what kind of woman would agree to this. Then he nodded once, sharply, and moved to the machine. The process was more complicated than his explanation had suggested. First he asked me questions, dozens of them, about my health, my family history, whether I suffered from fainting spells or headaches or dreams that seemed unusually vivid. I answered as honestly as I could, though I omitted the nightmares that had plagued me since childhood, the sensation of drowning in darkness that sometimes woke me gasping in the night. Those seemed too personal, too revealing. Then he asked me to select a memory. "Something clear," he said, "something with strong sensory detail. A moment that mattered to you." I thought of my mother's face, but that memory was too precious, too private. Instead, I reached for something simpler. A day at the seaside when I was 7 years old, before my father died, before everything collapsed. The smell of salt air and the sound of gulls, the feel of wet sand between my toes. My father lifting me onto his shoulders so I could see over the crowd to where the bathing machines stood in a neat row along the shore. "Tell me about it," Dr. Thorne said, and I did, speaking softly while he adjusted dials and made notes in a leather-bound journal. When I finished, he helped me into the chair. The leather was cold through my dress. He lowered the metal crown onto my head, adjusting it carefully until it sat just above my ears. The metal was surprisingly heavy, and I felt a faint tingling where it touched my skin. "You may feel some discomfort," he said, "a sensation of pressure, perhaps, or heat. If it becomes unbearable, tell me immediately, and I will stop." I nodded, not trusting my voice. He moved to the machine and turned a key. The humming grew louder, deeper, until it resonated in my chest. The crown grew warm against my scalp. I closed my eyes and tried to think of the beach, of my father, of the child I had been before loss taught me what the world really was. The warmth became heat. The tingling became something sharper, like pins pressing into my skull. I gasped, but did not cry out. Behind my closed eyelids, I saw lights, bright and pulsing, forming patterns that seemed almost meaningful, almost like language. Then the pain stopped. The humming faded. I opened my eyes to find Dr. Thorne removing the crown from my head with careful hands. He looked pale, and a fine sheen of sweat covered his forehead. "Extraordinary," he whispered. "Absolutely extraordinary. I saw it, Miss Winters. I saw your memory, the beach, your father. I felt the joy you felt that day." His voice broke slightly on the last word, and I realized with a shock that he was crying. Silent tears tracked down his face as he turned away from me, gripping the edge of the machine as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. I should have felt triumph or relief or fear. Instead, I felt an unexpected rush of compassion for this strange man who had looked into my past and found something there that moved him to tears. "Are you all right?" I asked. He did not answer for a long moment. When he finally turned back to me, his face was composed again, the tears wiped away, but something had changed in his expression. He looked at me now as if I were a person rather than an experimental subject. "The machine works," he said, "but there is more to test. Miss Winters, would you be willing to undergo a second procedure? Not today, but tomorrow. I need to attempt the reverse process. I need to know if memory can not only be captured and viewed, but truly transferred from one mind to another." "What would that mean?" I asked. "It would mean you would receive one of my memories. You would experience something from my past as if it were your own. There is risk, of course. The human mind was not designed to hold memories that do not belong to it. There could be confusion, disorientation, perhaps temporary memory loss. Or permanent," I said. He hesitated, then nodded. "Or permanent." I thought of the 10 pounds. I thought of the landlady's face. I thought of the strange exhilaration I had felt when he described seeing my memory, the impossible wonder of it. To share experience so completely, to break down the walls that separated every human soul from every other. It was mad. It was brilliant. It was worth the risk. "Tomorrow, then," I said. He smiled for the first time, and it transformed his face entirely, making him look younger and somehow more vulnerable. He walked me to the door and pressed 5 pounds into my hand, crisp notes that felt impossibly substantial. "For today's work," he said, "come back at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And Miss Winters, thank you." I walked out into the foggy London afternoon with my head spinning and my purse heavier than it had been in months. The money bought me time. More than that, it bought me hope. I had become part of something larger than my small, confined life. For one brief moment, I had mattered. I should have known that mattering always comes at a price. But I did not learn that until the next day, when I returned to Dr. Thorne's laboratory and let him lower the crown onto my head once more. I did not learn it until I felt the strange pulling sensation, like being drawn down into dark water. I did not learn it until I opened my eyes and saw my own face staring back at me from across the room. My own lips moving to form words I did not speak. My own hands reaching up to remove a metal crown from my own head. I tried to scream, but the sound that came from my throat was wrong, deeper, rougher, not my voice at all. I looked down and saw unfamiliar hands, pale and long-fingered, adorned with rings I had never worn. I felt the weight of different hair, longer and heavier than mine had been, piled high on my head. I wore a dress of silk and lace, beautiful and expensive, nothing like my worn wool skirt and simple shirtwaist. Dr. Thorne stood frozen by the machine, his face gone white as chalk. The woman in my chair, The woman wearing my body stared at me with wide eyes. Then she smiled, slow and cold and satisfied, and I knew with horrible certainty that something had gone terribly, impossibly wrong. That was not my memory in her mind, and this, I realized as I looked down at my stolen hands, was not my body. Someone else lived here. Someone else's life filled this skull, these bones, this skin. And somewhere, trapped in my discarded body, someone else was screaming. The woman in my body stood up with a grace I had never possessed. She moved toward a mirror on the wall, touching her face, my face with wondering fingers. She traced the line of my jaw, the curve of my cheek, examining herself as one might examine a new dress or a piece of jewelry. Then she laughed, a sound so foreign to my own throat that it made my stolen heart race with terror. Dr. Thorne found his voice first. "What have you done?" he whispered. His hands gripped the machine as if he might tear it apart. "What have you done, Catherine?" Catherine. The name meant nothing to me, yet hearing it seemed to unlock something in the mind I now inhabited. Images flooded through me, fragmented and confusing. A grand estate with marble columns, a man with graying temples and cold eyes, a wedding dress hanging in a wardrobe, waiting, a locked door, a scream in the night. The woman, Catherine, turned from the mirror to face Dr. Thorne. Her expression, on my face, was one of pure triumph. "I have done what you were too weak to do, Cornelius. I have escaped. You promised me you could help me, that your machine could free me from this prison of a life. But you only wanted to study me, to record my memories like I was one of your laboratory specimens. So I took matters into my own hands. I tried to speak, but my tongue felt thick and clumsy in this unfamiliar mouth. The sounds that emerged were garbled, incomprehensible. Panic seized me, sharp and consuming. I looked down at my hands again, these elegant hands with their pearl rings and perfect nails, and I felt as if I were drowning in someone else's skin. Dr. Thorne moved toward me with careful steps, as one might approach a frightened animal. "Miss Winters," he said softly, "can you hear me? Can you understand what I am saying?" I nodded frantically. At least that much still worked. "You are in Lady Catherine Ashford's body," he said. "The transfer was not supposed to be complete. It was only meant to be an exchange of memory, a temporary sharing. This should not have been possible. But it was," Catherine said from across the room. She was examining my hands now, flexing the fingers, testing their range of motion. "All it required was a small adjustment to your precious machine while you were distracted. A reversal of the polarity, a doubling of the duration. You made it so beautifully simple, Cornelius. All those diagrams in your journals, every detail carefully recorded. Did you think I was not paying attention during our sessions? Did you think I was merely a patient, docile and unquestioning? You have stolen this woman's life," Dr. Thorne said. His voice shook with barely controlled rage. "You have condemned her to yours." "I have given her a gift," Catherine replied. She was nobody. A typist scratching out an existence in a rented room, desperate enough to sell herself to science for a handful of coins. Now she is Lady Catherine Ashford, mistress of Ashford Manor, betrothed to Lord Edmund Hartley, one of the richest men in England. I have given her wealth, position, everything a woman of her station could never hope to achieve. She moved closer to Dr. Thorne, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, something that might have been regret or longing. As for me, I am finally free. I can disappear into the vast anonymity of London. I can become anyone I wish to be. No more locked doors, no more endless empty days waiting for a wedding that feels like a funeral. No more pretending to be the perfect lady, the dutiful daughter, the obedient wife to be. "Cornelius," Catherine said more softly, "you could have helped me if you had wanted to. You knew what my life was. You knew what I was running from." "I knew you were unhappy," he said. "I did not know you were capable of this. Then you did not know me at all." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken history. I stood frozen, my mind racing. I needed to understand what was happening, needed to grasp the reality of my situation before the panic overwhelmed me entirely. I forced myself to breathe slowly, deliberately, feeling the unfamiliar ribcage expand and contract, the different weight of this body's chest. Finally, I managed to form words. My voice came out wrong, cultured and refined where mine had been plain, but at least it was coherent. How do we reverse this? Catherine laughed again. We do not. The process is irreversible. The machine can record and transfer, but it cannot undo what has been done. You are Catherine Ashford now, for better or worse. And I, she gestured to my former body with a theatrical flourish, I am finally, blessedly, nobody at all. Dr. Thorne turned to me, and I saw guilt written plainly across his face. Miss Winters, I am profoundly sorry. This was never meant to happen. I swear to you, I had no knowledge of Lady Catherine's intentions. She came to me 3 months ago complaining of melancholia, of disturbing dreams and memory loss. I agreed to try to help her, to use the machine, to understand the root of her distress. I never imagined she would use our sessions to study the device itself. You never imagined a woman could be clever enough to understand your work, Catherine said coldly. That was always your weakness, Cornelius. You see us as subjects, never as equals. She walked to the door, moving with my body as if she had worn it all her life. I should have felt violated, watching someone else inhabit my flesh. Instead, I felt strangely distant from it, as if that body had never truly belonged to me at all. Goodbye, Dr. Thorne, Catherine said. I trust you will help Miss Winters adjust to her new circumstances. After all, you owe her that much. And Miss Winters, she turned to look at me with my own eyes. I wish you joy of my life. Perhaps you will find a way to bear it that I could not. Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. I heard her footsteps receding down the hallway, heard the front door open and close. She had walked out into London wearing my face, carrying my identity, leaving me trapped in a life I knew nothing about. Dr. Thorne sank into one of the chairs, his head in his hands. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The machine hummed quietly between us, indifferent to the catastrophe it had facilitated. Tell me about her, I said finally. Tell me about Catherine Ashford. He looked up at me, his gray-green eyes haunted. She is, or was, the only daughter of the late Viscount Ashford. Her father died 2 years ago, leaving her a considerable fortune and the Ashford estate in Kent. She is engaged to be married to Lord Edmund Hartley, a union arranged by her father before his death. The wedding is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. Does she love him? I asked. He hesitated. I do not believe so. From what she told me, Lord Hartley is significantly older than she is, a widower with 2 grown children. The marriage is one of financial and social advantage. Lady Catherine's fortune will restore the Hartley estates, which have fallen into debt. In return, she will become a marchioness and gain considerable social standing. So she is selling herself, I said. Just as I sold myself. The only difference is the price. Dr. Thorne flinched at that, but he did not contradict me. There is more, he said quietly. Lady Catherine spoke of other things during our sessions, disturbing things. She claimed that Ashford Manor was haunted, that she heard voices in the night, saw shadows that moved with no source. She spoke of a locked wing of the house that her father forbade her to enter, of servants who would not meet her eyes, of a sense that something terrible had happened there. Was she mad? I asked. I do not know. He rubbed his face wearily. She seemed lucid, rational, except when she spoke of the manor. Then there was a quality to her voice, a fear that seemed too genuine to be delusion. But I am a scientist, Miss Winters. I do not believe in ghosts or hauntings. I assumed her visions were products of an overwrought mind, symptoms of the melancholia she suffered. And now I must go to that place, I said. I must live in a haunted manor, marry a man I have never met, assume the life of a woman I know nothing about. The weight of it crashed over me then, the full, impossible reality. I was not merely wearing Catherine Ashford's body. I was expected to be her, to know what she knew, to remember what she remembered. I would have to fool her servants, her friends, her betrothed. I would have to navigate a social world I had only glimpsed from a distance, a world of titles and estates and rules I did not understand. I cannot do this, I whispered. Dr. Thorne stood and came to me. He took my hands, these strange hands that did not feel like mine, and held them gently. Listen to me, he said. Catherine Ashford's memories are inside you now. The transfer was complete. Both ways. You have her memories, her knowledge, her experiences. They are buried deep, perhaps, tangled with your own, but they are there. You can access them if you try. I closed my eyes and reached inward, searching for something that was not mine. At first there was only darkness and confusion. Then, slowly, images began to surface. A nursery with painted walls, a woman singing a lullaby, a garden filled with white roses, a father's stern face, a music room where a pianoforte stood silent and dusty. The memories were there, fragmented and dreamlike, but real. I could feel them settling into place beside my own, two lives intertwining in a single mind. It was dizzying, disorienting, like trying to read two books at once. I opened my eyes. How long do I have? I asked. Before I must return to Ashford Manor. Lady Catherine was staying at the Langham Hotel, Dr. Thorne said. She, was scheduled to return to Kent tomorrow morning. Her maid is with her, a woman named Mrs. Albright. Then I have one night, I said. One night to become someone else entirely. Dr. Thorne released my hands and turned away. Miss Winters, I will find a way to reverse this. I swear to you. I will study the machine, run new tests, consult with colleagues. There must be a way to undo what Catherine has done. And if there is not, I asked, then I will help you however I can. I will be your ally in this deception, your confidant. You will not face this alone. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that this brilliant, haunted man would save me from the nightmare I had stumbled into. But I had learned long ago that trust was a luxury people like me could not afford. Take me to the hotel, I said. I need to see Catherine's rooms, her belongings. I need to understand who I am supposed to be. He nodded and helped me to my feet. I swayed slightly, adjusting to the different balance of this taller, more substantial body. The silk dress whispered around me as I moved, and I felt the weight of the hair piled on my head, held in place by what felt like a dozen pins. Everything was wrong, alien, borrowed. We took a hansom cab through the darkening streets. Gas lamps flickered to life as we passed, casting pools of yellow light onto wet cobblestones. The fog was thicker now, muffling the sounds of the city, turning familiar landmarks into ghostly suggestions. I sat rigidly on the leather seat, afraid to move, afraid that any gesture would betray me as an imposter. The Langham Hotel rose before us like a palace, all white stone and brilliant windows. Doorman in livery opened the carriage door and helped me down with practiced deference. Inside, the lobby was a marvel of marble and gilt, crystal chandeliers casting rainbows across the floor. Women in evening gowns glided past on the arms of gentlemen in tailcoats. This was the world Catherine Ashford inhabited, a world of wealth and privilege, so far removed from my own experience that it might as well have been another country. Dr. Thorne spoke to the desk clerk, and we were directed to a suite on the 3rd floor. A maid met us at the door, an older woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes. She curtsied to me, her gaze sweeping over my appearance with what looked like concern. "Lady Catherine," she said, "you look pale. Are you quite well?" "I am tired, Mrs. Albright," I said, praying that was indeed her name. The session with Dr. Thorne was more taxing than I anticipated. The maid nodded as if this confirmed something she had suspected. "I have drawn you a bath, my lady, and laid out your evening dress. Lord Hartley has sent word that he will call upon you tomorrow morning before your departure for Kent. He wishes to discuss the wedding arrangements." My heart sank. Tomorrow I would meet the man Catherine was meant to marry, the man I was now expected to marry. A stranger who would look at me and see his betrothed, who would expect me to know him, to respond to him with appropriate affection, or at least appropriate courtesy. "Thank you, Mrs. Albright," I managed to say. "Please leave us. I wish to speak with Dr. Thorne privately." She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the impropriety of leaving me alone with a man who was not my fiancé. But I was a lady now, mistress of my own decisions, and she could not refuse. She curtsied again and withdrew, closing the door softly behind her. I sank onto a velvet settee, suddenly exhausted. The room around me was beautiful, decorated in shades of cream and rose, with paintings on the walls and fresh flowers on every surface. It was a room designed for someone important, someone who mattered. It felt like a stage set, unreal and temporary. Dr. Thorne stood by the window, looking out at the fog-shrouded city. "I am sorry," he said again. The words seemed inadequate, but he said them anyway, as if repetition might make them mean something. "I need you to tell me everything you know about her," I said. "About Catherine, about her life, her habits, her relationships. If I am to survive this, I need to be able to convince people that I am who they think I am." He turned to face me, and in the lamplight I could see how young he truly was beneath the exhaustion and the grief. He was a man who had lost something, I realized. Someone. The pain in his eyes when he had seen my memory of my father, the way Catherine's name had caught in his throat. There was history here, tangled and painful. "I will tell you everything I know," he said. "But, Miss Winters, I must warn you. Catherine Ashford was running from something. Something she believed was worth any price to escape. If you go to Ashford Manor, you will walk into whatever darkness she was fleeing. You will face whatever she could not bear to face." I thought of the locked wing, the voices in the night, the shadows with no source. I thought of a woman so desperate that she had stolen another's life, so frightened that she had committed an act of profound cruelty to free herself. "Then I will face it," I said. "What choice do I have?" He crossed the room and knelt before me, taking my hands again. His touch was warm, grounding, the only real thing in a world that had become a waking dream. "I will not abandon you," he said. "I will visit Ashford Manor. I will find reasons to see you, to help you navigate this deception. You have my word." I looked into his unusual eyes and saw the truth there. He felt responsible for what had happened. More than that, he felt guilty, as if Catherine's desperate act was somehow his fault. Perhaps it was. Perhaps by offering her a glimpse of escape, by showing her the machine's power, he had planted the seed of this terrible plan. Or perhaps Catherine Ashford had always been capable of this, and Dr. Thorne had simply provided the means. Tomorrow, I would meet Lord Hartley. Tomorrow, I would leave London for a manor in Kent, a place haunted by secrets and shadows. Tomorrow, I would begin living a lie that might consume the rest of my life. But tonight, I was still myself, still the woman who had been Eleanor Winters, typist and nobody. Tonight I could mourn the loss of my old life, small and constrained as it had been. Tonight I could be afraid. Dr. Thorne stayed with me until late, telling me everything he could remember about Catherine Ashford. He spoke of her childhood, her father's coldness, her isolated life at the manor. He described Lord Hartley as an ambitious man, politically connected, with a reputation for ruthlessness in business. He warned me about the servants, particularly the butler, a man named Graves, who had served the Ashford family for 30 years and might notice any change in his mistress. When he finally left, I sat alone in the lamplight and reached deep into the memories that were not mine. I found fragments of Catherine's life waiting there like ghosts. I saw her face in mirrors, saw the world through her eyes. I heard her voice in my head, cool and cultured, nothing like my own. Slowly, carefully, I began to understand who I had become. Lady Catherine Ashford was educated, accomplished, well-versed in music and languages. She was also lonely, deeply and profoundly lonely, trapped in a life that had been chosen for her before she could choose for herself. She had loved once, I discovered, finding the memory buried deep. A young man, a neighbor's son, unsuitable and poor. Her father had sent him away and forbidden her to speak his name. That was when the locked door had appeared in her mind, the first barrier between herself and feeling. I went to the mirror and looked at the face that was now mine. Catherine Ashford stared back at me, beautiful and cold, her dark eyes revealing nothing. I would wear this face for the rest of my life. I would live in her body, speak with her voice, inhabit her world. And somewhere in London, wearing my plain face and my worn clothes, the real Catherine Ashford was tasting freedom for the first time. I wondered if she thought of me at all. I wondered if she felt any guilt for what she had done, any regret for the life she had stolen. Or was she simply relieved, grateful to have escaped whatever darkness waited at Ashford Manor? In 3 weeks, I would marry Lord Edmund Hartley. In 3 weeks, I would become Lady Hartley, bound by law and custom to a man I did not know, trapped in a life I had never chosen. But first, I had to survive tomorrow. First, I had to convince a man who knew Catherine intimately that I was the woman he intended to marry. I touched the mirror, and my reflection touched back, a stranger wearing my soul like an ill-fitting coat. The machine had given me Catherine Ashford's memories, her knowledge, her past, but it had not given me her courage or her coldness. I was still Eleanor Winters inside, still the frightened typist who had answered an advertisement because she had no other choice. The question was whether Eleanor Winters could become Catherine Ashford completely enough to survive, or whether the deception would destroy me long before anyone discovered the truth. I went to bed in silk sheets that smelled of lavender and roses. I lay awake in the darkness, feeling the strangeness of this body, this life, this impossible situation. And when I finally slept, I dreamed of locked doors and shadowed hallways, of voices calling my name, both names, Eleanor and Catherine, until I could not remember which one I had been born with and which one I had stolen. Lord Edmund Hartley arrived precisely at 10 o'clock the following morning. Mrs. Albright announced him with a curtsy, her expression carefully neutral, though I caught a flicker of something in her eyes as she withdrew. Pity, perhaps, or sympathy. I wondered how much the maid knew about the marriage her mistress was being forced into. I had spent the early hours reviewing Catherine's memories, searching through them like a woman searching through a stranger's wardrobe, trying to find something that fit. I knew that Lord Hartley was 43 years old. I knew that his first wife had died in childbirth 7 years ago. I knew that he had a son and daughter from that marriage, both grown, both living on his estate in Surrey. I knew that Catherine's father had arranged this match on his deathbed, binding his daughter with his final wish. What I did not know was how Catherine had felt about him. Her memories showed me his face, tall and distinguished with graying hair and a military bearing, but they did not show me her heart. There was a blankness there, a deliberate absence, as if she had learned to feel nothing when she looked at him. He entered the sitting room with the confidence of a man accustomed to being welcomed everywhere. He was handsome in the way that wealth and breeding make men handsome, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that assessed everything they saw. He wore a perfectly tailored morning coat, and he carried himself with the ease of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. "Catherine," he said, crossing the room to take my hand. He raised it to his lips in a gesture that was more formal than affectionate. "You look well. Dr. Thorne's treatments seem to be helping with your melancholia." I managed a smile that I hoped looked genuine. "I am feeling much improved, thank you." He studied my face with an intensity that made me deeply uncomfortable. There was something calculating in his gaze. as if he were appraising a horse he was considering purchasing. I forced myself not to look away, not to betray the fear that crawled beneath my skin. "Excellent," he said, releasing my hand. "I trust you are prepared for our journey to Ashford Manor tomorrow. I have taken the liberty of arranging for my carriage to collect you at noon. We shall travel together, and I will remain at the manor for several days to oversee the final wedding preparations." "Together," I repeated, my heart sinking. I had hoped for more time, more space, to learn how to be Catherine Ashford before I had to perform the role in close quarters. "Surely you do not object to my company," he said, and there was an edge to his voice now, a hint of displeasure. "We are to be married in less than 3 weeks, Catherine. It is appropriate that we spend time together, that we come to know one another better." "Of course," I said quickly. "I only meant that I did not wish to inconvenience you with the journey." "It is no inconvenience." He moved to the window, looking out at the London streets below. "In fact, I have been eager to see Ashford Manor again. Your father and I spent many pleasant hours there discussing our business arrangements. It will be good to revisit those memories." Something in his tone made me uneasy. There was a possessiveness in the way he spoke of the manor, as if it already belonged to him. I searched Catherine's memories and found something dark there, a conversation overheard. Her father and Lord Hartley speaking in low voices about debts and obligations, about how fortunate Catherine was to have such an advantageous match offered to her. She had not been offered anything. She had been sold, bartered, traded like property to settle her father's affairs. Lord Hartley turned back to me. "I have also taken the liberty of inviting my children to join us at the manor next week. I believe it is time they met their future stepmother properly. They will be living with us after the wedding, at least until my son comes of age and takes possession of his own estate." "How old are they?" I asked, though I knew the answer from Catherine's memories. 21 and 19. "Edward is 22 now," Lord Hartley said. "He has just completed his studies at Cambridge. My daughter Victoria is 19. She has been living with my sister in Bath, but will join our household after the wedding. I trust you will provide her with appropriate guidance and companionship." The thought of playing stepmother to young adults barely younger than myself, or rather than Catherine, filled me with dread. How could I possibly guide or advise anyone when I could barely navigate my own stolen existence? "I look forward to meeting them," I lied. Lord Hartley consulted his pocket watch, a heavy gold piece that caught the light. "I must take my leave. I have a meeting with my solicitor this afternoon regarding the marriage settlements. Everything will be in order, Catherine. Your father's estate will be protected, and you will want for nothing as my wife." He said it as if he were offering me a gift, as if I should be grateful. Perhaps Catherine would have been grateful once, before whatever happened at Ashford Manor had made her desperate enough to steal another woman's life. "Thank you," I said, because that was what he seemed to expect. He crossed to me again and took both my hands this time, holding them firmly. "You have made me very happy by agreeing to this marriage, Catherine. I know it was your father's wish, but I hope in time it will become yours as well. I will be a good husband to you. You will have every comfort, every luxury. All I ask in return is that you be a credit to my name and bear me the heir my first wife could not." The words were spoken matter-of-factly, as if discussing a business contract, which, I realized with a chill, was exactly what this marriage was to him, an exchange of assets. Her fortune for his title and protection, her youth and potential fertility for his security and status. I felt Catherine's memories stir, a flash of rage so intense it took my breath away. She had felt this same helpless fury, sitting where I sat, listening to her future being decided without her consent or consideration. "I will do my duty," I said, and the coldness in my voice surprised even me. Something flickered in Lord Hartley's eyes, approval mixed with something darker. "Good," he said. "I knew your father raised you to understand the obligations of your station. He left then, and I sat trembling in the empty room. This was the man I would marry. This was the life Catherine had fled, and I, who had once thought my small, constrained existence was the worst fate that could befall a woman, now understood that there were prisons far more elegant and far more inescapable than a rented room in a shabby lodging house. Mrs. Albright returned to help me dress for travel. She packed Catherine's trunks with practiced efficiency, folding silk gowns and lace petticoats, wrapping jewelry in soft cloth, organizing everything with the care of someone who had performed this task many times before. I watched her work and tried to imagine having someone do such things for me, having so many possessions that one person's full-time occupation was managing them. "You are very quiet today, my lady," Mrs. Albright said as she fastened the buttons on my traveling dress. "Are you anxious about returning home?" Home. Ashford Manor was not my home, would never be my home, but I could not say that. "I am simply tired," I said. She met my eyes in the mirror, and for a moment I thought she might say something more, but she only nodded and finished adjusting my collar. "The manor will be glad to have you back," she said. "It has been too quiet there since your father passed. That night I barely slept. I lay in the darkness, thinking about everything I had learned from Catherine's memories, trying to piece together the fragments into something coherent. The manor had been built in the 16th century, expanded and renovated by generations of Ashfords. The west wing was the oldest part, medieval and cold. Catherine's father had kept it locked for as long as she could remember, claiming the structure was unsafe. But Catherine had heard sounds from behind those locked doors, footsteps and voices, sometimes weeping, sometimes laughter that did not sound entirely human. The servants spoke of the West Wing in whispers. One of the housemaids, a girl named Anne, had claimed to see a woman in white walking the gardens at night, always moving toward the locked wing as if drawn by some invisible force. Anne had been dismissed shortly after, accused of spreading superstitious nonsense. But others had seen things too, shadows in windows where no one should be, lights flickering in rooms that had been sealed for decades. Catherine had told Dr. Thorne about these things, and he had attributed them to her troubled mind, to the melancholia and grief following her father's death. But what if she had been telling the truth? What if Ashford Manor truly was haunted, truly did hold some dark secret behind those locked doors? I would find out soon enough. The journey to Kent began just after noon the following day. Lord Hartley's carriage was luxurious, all polished wood and velvet cushions, pulled by 4 matched horses. He handed me in with practiced courtesy, then settled across from me for the long journey. Mrs. Albright rode in a second carriage with the luggage and Lord Hartley's valet, leaving the two of us alone in the close confines of the carriage. As we rolled through London streets, Lord Hartley made polite conversation about the wedding preparations, the guest list, the menu for the wedding breakfast. I responded with the appropriate murmurs and nods, trying to appear attentive while my mind raced ahead to the manor, to whatever awaited me there. It was only when we left London behind and entered the green countryside of Kent that Lord Hartley's conversation took a more personal turn. "Your father spoke highly of you, Catherine," he said. "He told me you were accomplished in music and languages, well-read, properly educated for your station. But he also mentioned that you had a tendency toward willfulness, toward questioning things that should not be questioned. I chose my words carefully. I have always been curious, my lord, perhaps too curious for a woman." He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Curiosity is not necessarily a fault, but it must be properly directed. A wife should be interested in her household, her children, her husband's welfare. She should not concern herself with business matters or politics or subjects beyond her understanding. "I see," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Your father understood this," he continued. "He understood that a woman needs guidance, structure, a firm hand. He was a military man, you know. He knew the value of discipline and order. I believe he would approve of the way I intend to manage our household." The way he said manage sent a chill through me. I looked out the window at the passing landscape, trying to calm the anxiety rising in my chest. "I noticed during your time in London that you were receiving treatments from Dr. Thorne," Lord Hartley said. "For your melancholia, I believe?" "Yes," I said. "He has been very helpful. I am glad to hear it. However, once we are married, I believe it would be best if you discontinued those treatments. A married woman has no need for such things. Your duties and responsibilities will provide you with all the occupation and purpose you require." I turned from the window to stare at him. "You would forbid me from seeking medical treatment. I would protect you from quackery and pseudoscience," he corrected smoothly. "This Dr. Thorne and his electrical machines, his theories about memory and the mind, it is all highly irregular, dangerous even. I have made inquiries about him, Catherine. He is not well regarded in medical circles. Some consider him a charlatan, others a madman. I will not have my wife associated with such a person." The thought of being cut off from Dr. Thorne, from the only person who knew the truth about my situation, filled me with panic. But I forced myself to remain calm, to think. "Perhaps we could discuss this further after the wedding," I said carefully. "I would like to complete the course of treatment Dr. Thorne recommended." "We will discuss it no further," Lord Hartley said, and his voice had gone cold. "This is not a negotiation, Catherine. This is how things will be. You will obey me in this, as you will obey me in all things once we are married. I am trying to be kind about it, to give you time to adjust to the idea. But make no mistake, I will be the master of my household and the master of my wife." The silence that followed was suffocating. I looked at this man, this stranger who would own me legally once we were married, who would control every aspect of my life, who would expect obedience and submission in exchange for comfort and security. And I understood finally and completely why Catherine Ashford had been willing to commit such a terrible act to escape him. The rest of the journey passed in tense quiet. Lord Hartley read a newspaper, occasionally commenting on political matters as if the earlier conversation had not occurred. I stared out the window and tried to find some way out of the trap I was in. But every path I considered led to the same conclusion. I was Catherine Ashford now. Her life was my life. Her future was my future. And in 3 weeks, I would marry this man unless I could find a way to stop it. We arrived at Ashford Manor as dusk was falling. The house rose from the landscape like something from a Gothic novel, all towers and steep gables, dark stone-stained, darker by centuries of rain and soot. The west wing jutted out at an odd angle, its windows boarded shut, its walls covered in ivy that seemed to strangle rather than decorate. The main house was more welcoming, with lights glowing in the windows and smoke rising from several chimneys. But there was something oppressive about the place, a weight in the air that made it hard to breathe. I felt it the moment I stepped from the carriage, a sense of wrongness, of secrets pressed down under stone, and silence. The servants lined up in the entrance hall to greet us. Graves, the butler, stood at their head, a tall, cadaverous man with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to see everything. He bowed stiffly as we entered. "Welcome home, Lady Catherine," he said. "We have prepared the house for your return and for Lord Hartley's visit." "Thank you, Graves," I said, and saw something flicker in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or suspicion. Had my voice been wrong, my tone not quite what Catherine's would have been? "Mrs. Albright will show you to your rooms," Lord Hartley said. "I will be staying in the blue suite in the east wing. Perhaps you would join me for dinner at 8 o'clock, Catherine. We have much to discuss regarding the wedding preparations." "Of course," I said. I followed Mrs. Albright up the grand staircase, past portraits of stern-faced Ashfords staring down from the walls. Catherine's rooms were in the south wing, overlooking the gardens. They were beautiful, decorated in shades of cream and gold, with a canopied bed and a dressing room larger than my old lodging-house room had been. But they felt like a cell. And when I looked out the window at the darkening grounds, I could see the west wing in the distance, its boarded windows like blind eyes, its walls shadowed and secret. "What is in the west wing?" I asked Mrs. Albright as she unpacked my things. She went very still, her hands frozen in the act of hanging a dress. "That wing is not in use, my lady. Your father sealed it years ago." Why? I pressed. I could not say, my lady. She would not meet my eyes. It is not my place to question the master's decisions. But you have been here a long time, I said, remembering that from Catherine's memories. Surely you must know something. She finally looked at me, and I saw fear in her face, real and profound. Some things are better left alone, Lady Catherine. Some doors are locked for good reason. She finished unpacking quickly after that and left me alone. I stood at the window, watching the night settle over the grounds. Somewhere in that sealed wing, something waited. Some secret that had driven Catherine to desperation, that had made Lord Hartley smile when he spoke of managing his household, that made the servants afraid to even speak of it. I had 3 weeks to discover what it was. 3 weeks before I became Lady Hartley, bound to a man who terrified me, trapped in a house that felt more like a prison than a home. And somewhere in London, wearing my face and living my stolen freedom, Catherine Ashford was probably sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. I touched the cold glass of the window and made myself a promise. I would uncover the truth about this house. I would find out what lay behind those locked doors. And somehow, some way, I would find a path to freedom that did not require stealing another woman's life. But first, I had to survive dinner with Lord Hartley. First, I had to continue the deception, to play the role of the obedient bride-to-be. First, I had to convince everyone in this house that I was Catherine Ashford, returned home to prepare for her wedding, unchanged and unsuspecting. Even though I could feel the house watching me, waiting to see if I would discover its secrets. Even though I knew that with every hour that passed, I was sinking deeper into a life that would eventually consume me completely. I rang for Mrs. Albright to help me dress for dinner, and as she fastened the buttons of my evening gown, I practiced smiling at my reflection, practiced being the woman everyone expected me to be. But inside, Eleanor Winters was screaming. Dinner with Lord Hartley was an exercise in endurance. We sat at opposite ends of a table designed to seat 20, separated by silver candelabra and elaborate floral arrangements that made conversation feel both forced and distant. He spoke of his estates, his investments, his political connections. I listened and responded with what I hoped were appropriate remarks, all while acutely aware of Graves standing motionless by the sideboard, his dark eyes tracking my every movement. The food was exquisite. Course after course of delicacies I could never have afforded in my old life. But each bite felt like ash in my mouth. I could not shake the feeling that I was being tested, observed, measured against some standard I did not understand. Your father kept an excellent wine cellar, Lord Hartley said, as Graves poured a dark red vintage into crystal glasses. I have always appreciated his taste in such matters. A man's cellar tells you much about his character. He raised his glass to me in a toast. To your father's memory, Catherine, and to our future together. I lifted my glass and drank, the wine sharp and bitter on my tongue. After dinner, Lord Hartley suggested we take a turn in the conservatory. The glass-enclosed room was warm and humid, filled with exotic plants that Catherine's father had collected from around the empire. Orchids bloomed in profusion, their heavy scent almost overwhelming. Gas lamps cast strange shadows through the leaves, making the space feel more like a jungle than a room. Lord Hartley took my arm as we walked among the plants. His grip was firm, possessive. I have been thinking about our wedding journey, he said. I believe we should spend a month on the continent, Paris perhaps, and then Venice. You would enjoy Venice, I think. It is very romantic. That sounds lovely, I said, though the thought of spending a month alone with him in foreign cities filled me with dread. We will need to discuss other matters as well, he continued. The management of your father's estate, for instance. I have reviewed the accounts, and there are certain improvements that could be made. Investments that should be redirected. I will handle all of that for you, of course. You need not trouble yourself with financial matters. My father's estate is held in trust for me, I said carefully, remembering this from Catherine's memories. The terms were quite specific. "Trust arrangements can be modified after marriage," he replied smoothly. "Your husband will have legal authority over your property." "That is simply the natural order of things, Catherine. You should be grateful to have someone capable of managing your affairs." We had stopped walking. I pulled my arm free from his grip, turning to face him among the shadowed plants. "And if I do not wish to modify the trust arrangements?" His expression did not change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Then we would have a problem," he said quietly. "A problem that would reflect poorly on you, on your father's memory, on the good name of the Ashford family. Surely you do not wish to be seen as a disobedient wife, unwilling to trust her husband's judgment." It was a threat, carefully couched in reasonable language, but a threat nonetheless. I felt Catherine's memories rise up, showing me other conversations like this one, her father and Lord Hartley discussing how best to handle Catherine's willfulness, how to ensure her compliance. She had been present for some of those conversations, treated as if she were a child or a problem to be solved, rather than a person with her own thoughts and rights. "I understand," I said, because there was nothing else I could say without revealing myself as an imposter or inviting his anger. "Good." He smiled and offered his arm again. "I knew you would be reasonable. Your father always said you were clever enough to see sense when it was explained to you properly." We walked back to the main house in silence. Lord Hartley retired to his rooms shortly after, claiming fatigue from the journey. I went to my own chambers with Mrs. Albright attending me, helping me out of the elaborate evening gown and into a nightdress that whispered like water against my skin. "Will there be anything else, my lady?" she asked. I hesitated, then made a decision. "Mrs. Albright, how long have you been at Ashford Manor?" 10 years, my lady. I came as an under-housemaid and was promoted to your personal maid when you turned 16. Then you knew my father well." She looked uncomfortable. "As well as a servant can know the master, yes. What happened in the West Wing?" I asked directly. "Why is it sealed?" Her face went pale. "I could not say, my lady, could not or will not." She met my eyes, and I saw genuine fear there. "Please, Lady Catherine, do not ask me to speak of it. Some things are best left in the past, buried and forgotten." "But they are not forgotten, are they?" I pressed. "The servants still speak of it. I have seen the way they look at the West Wing, the way they avoid passing too close to it. Something terrible happened there." Mrs. Albright twisted her hands together, clearly torn between loyalty to her mistress and fear of whatever secrets the manor held. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "There was a fire, my lady, 23 years ago, in the West Wing. Your mother died in that fire." I felt the shock of it ripple through me. Catherine's memories had shown me a mother who died young, but the details had been vague, obscured by childhood confusion and grief. "I had been too young when she died," the memories said. "Only 5 years old. Old enough to remember having a mother, but not old enough to remember the details of how she had been lost. But Mrs. Albright's revelation suggested something more sinister than a tragic accident." "How did the fire start?" I asked. "No one knows for certain. Your father said it was an accident, a fallen candle perhaps. But there were rumors." She stopped, clearly unwilling to continue. "What kind of rumors?" "That it was not an accident. That your mother had been locked in that wing. That she could not escape when the fire started. That she had been screaming for help and no one had come." The room seemed to tilt around me. Why would my father lock his wife in a wing of the house? Mrs. Albright's eyes filled with tears. "Because she was mad, my lady. At least that is what he said. That your mother had suffered from a nervous disorder, that she had become dangerous to herself and others. He had the West Wing converted into a place where she could be kept safely, with nurses and attendants to care for her. And then one night, the fire. They found her body in what had been her bedroom. The door was locked from the outside." "Had my father locked her in?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Graves found the key in his pocket. But at the inquest, your father said he did not remember locking the door, that he had been intoxicated that evening, overcome with grief at his wife's condition. The verdict was accidental death. No charges were brought. I sank onto the edge of the bed, trying to process what I had learned. Catherine's father had essentially imprisoned his wife, locked her in a wing of the house like some Gothic horror. And then she had died in a fire that might not have been an accident at all. And Catherine had grown up in this house, knowing or suspecting what had happened, haunted by her mother's ghost or the guilt of her father's actions. "Is that why the wing is sealed?" I asked. "Because of the fire?" "Partly, but also because of what happened after. The servants say they hear things from that wing, crying, banging on doors. They say your mother's spirit cannot rest, that she is trapped there still, reliving the fire over and over." "Do you believe that?" I asked. Mrs. Albright looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. "I believe the past leaves marks on places, my lady. I believe some sorrows are too great to simply disappear. And I believe your father was terrified of that wing until the day he died. He would never go near it, never speak of it, and he forbade anyone else from entering it or even discussing it." "And yet Lord Hartley wants to open it," I said, remembering something he had mentioned during dinner. He spoke of renovating the west wing, of making use of the space. Mrs. Albright's expression became carefully neutral. "Lord Hartley is not a man who believes in ghosts or superstition, my lady. He believes in property and profit. That wing represents wasted space, wasted potential. He has already made inquiries about the cost of restoration. He cannot open it without my permission," I said. "It is part of my father's estate. It belongs to me." "For now, Mrs." Albright said quietly. "But once you are married, everything that is yours will become his. That is the law." She left me alone with my thoughts and a single candle burning on the bedside table. I sat in the darkness and tried to understand the full horror of my situation. I was trapped in the body of a woman whose mother had been locked away and left to burn to death, whose father had covered up what might have been murder, whose fiancé saw her merely as a means to an end. And somewhere in the sealed West Wing, a secret waited, a truth that Catherine had been trying to escape. I had to know what was there. I had to understand what had driven Catherine to such desperate measures. And perhaps, if I could uncover the truth about her mother's death, I could find a way to stop the wedding, to break free from Lord Hartley's control before it was too late. The next morning, I woke to find a note had been slipped under my door. Dr. Thorne was requesting permission to call on me that afternoon. He claimed to have important information regarding my ongoing treatment. Relief flooded through me. At least I would have an ally, someone who knew the truth, someone who might help me navigate this nightmare. I spent the morning walking the grounds with Lord Hartley, who pointed out various improvements he intended to make once the estate was under his management. He spoke of draining the ornamental pond to make room for more formal gardens, of cutting down several old trees that he considered unsightly, of modernizing the stables and selling off some of the land to a railway company that wanted to run a line through the property. With every word, I felt Catherine's rage growing inside me. This was her home, her inheritance, and he was already planning how to tear it apart and remake it in his image. But I smiled and nodded and pretended to find his ideas sensible and forward-thinking. Dr. Thorne arrived just after lunch. Graves showed him to the drawing room where I waited, with Mrs. Albright present as a chaperone. Lord Hartley had excused himself to review some papers in the study, for which I was grateful. I needed to speak with Dr. Thorne without his presence. "Lady Catherine," Dr. Thorne said, bowing formally. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Of course, Doctor. I trust you have news about my treatment." He glanced at Mrs. Albright, clearly uncomfortable speaking in front of her. "Perhaps we could step into the conservatory," he suggested. "The fresh air might be beneficial." Mrs. Albright opened her mouth, as if to object, but I stood quickly. "That sounds lovely," I said. "Mrs. Albright, Please ask cook to prepare tea for us. We will take it in the conservatory in half an hour." She curtsied reluctantly and withdrew, leaving Dr. Thorne and me alone. We walked quickly to the conservatory, and once the door was closed behind us, I felt some of the tension ease from my shoulders. "Thank God you came," I said. "I do not know how much longer I can maintain this deception." He took my hands, his gray-green eyes full of concern. "How are you managing? Is Lord Hartley treating you well?" "He is treating me exactly as he intends to treat his wife," I said, "like property to be managed and controlled. He has already made it clear that once we are married, he will take control of Catherine's entire estate. He wants to open the West Wing, to renovate it." Dr. Thorne's expression darkened. "Catherine spoke to me about the West Wing. She was terrified of it, obsessed with it. She believed it held the key to understanding what her father had done, what he had been trying to hide. I told him everything Mrs. Albright had revealed about Catherine's mother, about the fire and the locked door. As I spoke, I watched his face change, saw understanding and horror dawn in his eyes. "Dear God," he said when I finished. "Her mother was locked away like a criminal or a lunatic, and then she died in a fire that may not have been an accident. No wonder Catherine was desperate to escape. She grew up in a house built on secrets and death. And now Lord Hartley wants to tear open those secrets," I said. "But I think there is more. I think Catherine knew something, suspected something that made her fear this place even more than the memory of her mother's death." Dr. Thorne was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I have been reviewing my notes from our sessions," he said. "Catherine spoke of dreams she had, nightmares that felt more like memories. She said she would wake up in the night hearing her mother's voice, calling her name. She said she sometimes felt as if there were two lives inside her head, two sets of memories that did not quite align." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, two sets of memories?" I thought at the time that it was simply a symptom of her melancholia, a confused state brought on by grief and anxiety. But now, knowing what we know about the machine, about what is possible with memory transfer, I wonder. He looked at me intently. What if Catherine was not the first person to use the machine in this way? What if someone else had discovered what it could do? "You think my father, Catherine's father, used the machine," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "You think he experimented with memory transfer. I think it is possible. The machine is not a new invention, Miss Winters. I inherited it from my own father, who was researching similar theories about memory and consciousness. He died 10 years ago, but before his death, he corresponded with various colleagues, including a military surgeon named Colonel Ashford." "Catherine's father," I whispered. "Yes. They were friends, fellow researchers in the early days of experimental psychology. My father's journals mention that Colonel Ashford was particularly interested in the treatment of nervous disorders, especially in women. He believed that certain mental afflictions could be cured by replacing damaged memories with healthy ones. He experimented on his wife," I said, the horror of it settling over me like a shroud. "Catherine's mother was not mad, or if she was, it was because of what he did to her." Dr. Thorne nodded grimly, and perhaps on his daughter as well. If Catherine had fragmented memories that felt like they belonged to someone else, it could be because her father used a prototype of the machine on her when she was a child. Perhaps he was trying to erase her memories of what happened to her mother, to replace them with something more palatable. So Catherine grew up with someone else's memories tangled with her own, never fully understanding what was real and what was implanted. And when she came to you, when she saw the machine in your laboratory, she recognized it. She understood what had been done to her, and she decided to use it to escape, to become someone else entirely, rather than live with the consequences of her father's experiments. Dr. Thorne's voice was heavy with sorrow. I should have seen it. I should have understood what she was planning. We stood in silence among the orchids, the weight of revelation pressing down on us. Catherine Ashford had not simply been running from an unwanted marriage or a haunted house. She had been running from a lifetime of violation, from a father who had treated her mind as his own personal laboratory, from memories that were not entirely her own. And now I was living with those same contaminated memories, trying to sort truth from fiction, reality from implanted fantasy. "We need to get into the West Wing," I said. "Whatever happened there, whatever Colonel Ashford was hiding, the evidence might still be there. If we can find proof of what he did, we might be able to stop this wedding. We might be able to expose Lord Hartley's plans for what they are, an attempt to seize control of an estate that should remain sealed and undisturbed." "But how?" Dr. Thorne asked. "The wing is locked. The keys are held by Graves. And Lord Hartley will be watching you closely now that the wedding is approaching." "Then we will have to be clever," I said. "And we will have to move quickly. I have less than 3 weeks before I become Lady Hartley and lose what little freedom I have left." He took my hands again, and this time the gesture felt less like a doctor comforting a patient and more like something else. Something warmer and more personal. "I will help you," he said. "Whatever you need, whatever it takes. You have my word, Miss Winters." "Eleanor," I said. "If we are to be conspirators, you should call me Eleanor." He smiled, and I felt something shift between us, some barrier falling away. "Eleanor," he repeated softly, "and you should call me Cornelius." We were standing very close together in the dim green light of the conservatory, surrounded by flowers that smelled like funeral wreaths. I could feel the warmth of his hands, see the flecks of gold in his gray-green eyes. For a moment, the impossible situation faded, and there was only this: 2 people who understood each other, who were bound together by shared secrets and shared danger. Then the door opened and Lord Hartley stepped in, his expression cold and assessing. "How touching," he said. "I had no idea Dr. Thorne's treatments were quite so intimate, Catherine." I pulled my hands free and stepped back, my heart racing. "Dr. Thorne was simply informing me about the next phase of my treatment," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Was he, indeed?" Lord Hartley moved closer, his eyes fixed on Dr. Thorne with unmistakable hostility. Because from where I stood, it appeared that he was taking liberties with my fiancée, liberties that I find profoundly inappropriate. Dr. Thorne met his gaze without flinching. "I apologize if my manner seemed improper, Lord Hartley. Lady Catherine was experiencing some distress, and I was attempting to provide reassurance. That is all." "Your services are no longer required," Lord Hartley said flatly. "Lady Catherine will not be continuing treatment with you. In fact, I must insist that you leave Ashford Manor immediately and do not return." "You cannot forbid me from seeking medical care," I said, anger overriding caution. Lord Hartley turned to me, and there was something dangerous in his expression. "I can and I will, Catherine. As I explained to you yesterday, I am responsible for your well-being now. And I do not believe this man has your best interests at heart. In fact, I suspect his interests lie in quite another direction entirely." He looked pointedly at the way Dr. Thorne and I were standing, at the lingering warmth between us that even I could feel. "You will leave now, Dr. Thorne," Lord Hartley said, "or I will have you removed by force. And if I discover that you have been in contact with Lady Catherine after this moment, I will ensure that your reputation in London is destroyed. I have considerable influence in medical circles. I can make certain that you never practice again." Dr. Thorne's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I understand, Lord Hartley." He turned to me, and his eyes held a message I could not quite read. "Lady Catherine, I wish you all the best in your recovery and your upcoming marriage." Then he was gone, leaving me alone with Lord Hartley in the humid, flower-scented air. "That man is not to set foot on this property again," Lord Hartley said. "Do I make myself clear?" "Perfectly clear," I said, though inside I was screaming with frustration and fear. Without Dr. Thorne, I had lost my only ally, my only hope of escape. Good. Lord Hartley offered his arm. "Now, shall we discuss the seating arrangements for the wedding breakfast? I have some thoughts about which of my political associates should be placed near which members of your family." I took his arm because I had no choice. As we walked back to the house, I caught a glimpse of the west wing through the conservatory glass. The boarded windows stared back at me like accusing eyes. Somewhere behind those locked doors, the truth waited, and I had less than 3 weeks to find it before I became Lord Hartley's property in every legal and practical sense. But now I would have to find it alone. The days that followed Dr. Thorne's expulsion from Ashford Manor felt like a slow suffocation. Lord Hartley kept me under constant observation, always present at meals, always suggesting we take walks together, always finding reasons to discuss wedding arrangements that required my immediate attention. He was charming and attentive, playing the role of devoted fiancé for the benefit of the servants and the few guests who called at the manor. But I could feel the iron control beneath the velvet glove, the unspoken threat in every smile. At night, I lay awake in Catherine's bed and listened to the house settle around me. Sometimes I heard sounds that might have been wind or old timbers creaking. Sometimes I heard sounds that were neither of those things. Footsteps in empty hallways, the faint echo of weeping. Once, I woke in the darkness to see a figure standing at the foot of my bed, pale and indistinct. I gasped and reached for the candle, and when the light flared, there was nothing there but shadows. I began to wonder if I was going mad, if the contaminated memories Catherine had carried, the fragments of her mother's consciousness that Colonel Ashford might have implanted in his daughter's mind, were now fragmenting my own sense of reality. I could no longer always distinguish between what I had experienced as Eleanor Winters and what I was remembering from Catherine's life. The boundaries were blurring, bleeding into each other like watercolors left too long in the rain. On the 10th day after my arrival at the manor, Lord Hartley's children came to visit. Edward Hartley was a tall young man with his father's sharp features and calculating eyes. He greeted me with cold courtesy, making it clear that he viewed me as an interloper, someone who had stolen his mother's place. Victoria was softer, kinder, but there was a wariness in her expression that suggested she had learned not to trust easily. We took tea in the drawing room, an awkward affair with long silences and stilted conversation. Lord Hartley dominated the discussion, speaking of his plans for the estate, for the family, for the future he was building. Edward nodded and agreed with everything his father said. Victoria simply looked at her hands, her tea growing cold in its cup. When Lord Hartley excused himself to speak with Graves about some household matter, Victoria surprised me by speaking directly to me for the first time. "You should run," she said softly, "while you still can." I stared at her, uncertain if I had heard correctly. "What did you say?" She glanced at the door to ensure we were alone. "My father is not a kind man, Lady Catherine. He was not kind to my mother, and he will not be kind to you. He wants your fortune and your estate. Once he has legal control of both, you will discover what he truly is." Edward shot his sister a warning glance, but she ignored him. "I am only telling her what someone should have told our mother," she continued. "Perhaps if someone had warned her, had given her a chance to escape, she might still be alive." The words hung in the air like smoke. I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. "Your mother did not die in childbirth, did she?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "That is what they said. That is what Father told everyone. But I was 12 years old when she died. I remember. I remember the bruises she tried to hide. I remember the way she flinched when he raised his voice. I remember the locked door and the screaming and the terrible silence afterward." Edward stood abruptly. "Victoria, that is enough. You should not speak of such things." "Why not?" she said, her voice breaking. "Because it is improper. Because it makes people uncomfortable. Because it is better to pretend everything was fine. That mother simply died of natural causes, and father grieved appropriately. But it is all lies, Edward. You know it as well as I do." Edward's expression was anguished, torn between loyalty to his father and the truth his sister was speaking. Finally, he sat back down and buried his face in his hands. "She is right," he said quietly. "Our mother was terrified of him. Toward the end, she begged me to help her leave. But I was only 15. I did not know what to do. I told myself that father knew best, that mother was simply unwell, that everything would be all right if we all just remained calm and obedient." "What happened?" I asked gently. "She fell down the stairs," Victoria said. "At least, that is what father said. She fell and struck her head and died instantly." But the servants whispered that father had been arguing with her just before, that they had heard shouting, the sound of something breaking. And when they found mother at the bottom of the stairs, her neck was broken, but there were also marks on her arms as if someone had grabbed her roughly. "The inquest ruled it an accident," Edward added. "Father's position, his connections, they protected him. No one wanted to accuse a lord of murdering his wife. It was easier to accept the official story." I felt cold all through, as if I had been plunged into ice water. Lord Hartley was not merely controlling and domineering, he was dangerous. And in less than 2 weeks I would be legally bound to him, with no protection, no escape. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Victoria met my eyes. "Because you are kind. I can see it in the way you speak to the servants, the way you listen when people talk. My mother was kind too, and it made her vulnerable. I do not want the same thing to happen to you." Before I could respond, Lord Hartley returned. He looked at the three of us with suspicion clearly written on his face. "What are you discussing so intently?" he asked. "Wedding arrangements," I said quickly. Victoria was offering to help me select flowers for the church. "How thoughtful," Lord Hartley said, but his eyes were cold. "Victoria, Edward, I believe it is time you return to your rooms. You must be tired from your journey." They left reluctantly, Victoria casting one last meaningful glance at me over her shoulder. When we were alone, Lord Hartley sat beside me on the settee, closer than was comfortable. "My children have been through a great deal," he said. "The loss of their mother affected them deeply. Sometimes they say things, dramatic things, that are not entirely grounded in reality. I hope they have not been filling your head with nonsense. They seem like good young people," I said carefully. "I am sure we will all get along well." His hand closed over mine, his grip firm to the point of pain. "I am glad to hear you say so. Family harmony is very important to me, as is loyalty. I expect my wife to be loyal, Catherine, to stand by me regardless of what others might say or suggest." "Of course," I said, though my heart was hammering. "Good." He released my hand and stood. "I have some business to attend to in the village. I will return by dinner. Perhaps you could spend the afternoon reviewing the guest list for the wedding. I have made some additions that I would like you to approve." He left me alone in the drawing room, and I sat trembling, trying to process everything I had learned. Lord Hartley had killed his first wife, or as good as killed her. And now he intended to marry me, to gain control of Catherine's fortune, and perhaps, eventually, to dispose of me as well once I had served my purpose. I had to get into the West Wing. Whatever secrets it held, they might be my only hope of stopping this wedding. If I could find evidence of what Colonel Ashford had done, of the experiments he had conducted, I might be able to create enough scandal to make the marriage impossible. At the very least, I might understand what Catherine had been so desperate to escape. That night, after dinner, and after Lord Hartley had retired to his rooms, I waited until the house was silent. Then I slipped out of bed, dressed in a simple day dress, and crept down the servants' stairs to the ground floor. I knew where Graves kept the household keys, had seen him unlock the silver cabinet earlier that day. If I could find the key to the West Wing, I could finally discover the truth. The servants' hall was dark and silent. I moved by feel, my hands trembling as I searched through the key ring Graves had left hanging on a hook behind his pantry door. There were dozens of keys, all unlabeled, all identical in the darkness. I would have to try them all. The entrance to the west wing was through a door in the north corridor, a heavy oak door bound with iron. I had passed it many times over the past days, always feeling a chill when I drew near, always sensing that something waited on the other side. The first key did not fit, nor the second, nor the third. I tried key after key, my hands shaking, my breath coming quick and shallow. Behind me, the manor was silent, but I could feel it watching, waiting to see what I would do. The 12th key turned in the lock with a soft click. The door swung open on hinges that shrieked like a wounded animal. Beyond was darkness absolute, a darkness that seemed to swallow the light from my candle. The air that flowed out was cold and stale, carrying the faint scent of char and something else, something organic and wrong. I stepped across the threshold. The west wing was a ruin. The fire that had killed Catherine's mother had destroyed much of the interior, leaving blackened walls and collapsed ceilings. But it was clear that someone had been here more recently. A path had been cleared through the debris, leading deeper into the wing. Someone had been exploring, searching for something. I followed the path, my candle casting wild shadows on the ruined walls. Portraits hung askew, their subjects rendered unrecognizable by smoke damage. Furniture lay broken and scattered as if thrown by some great force. And everywhere there was the sense of wrongness, of tragedy impressed into the very stones. The path led to what had once been a suite of rooms in the heart of the wing. The door hung off its hinges, revealing a space that made my blood run cold. It was a laboratory, or had been. Tables lined the walls, covered with strange equipment, bottles of chemicals, notebooks filled with cramped handwriting. And in the center of the room stood a machine, a brass and glass contraption that I recognized immediately. It was a prototype of Dr. Thorne's memory machine. Cruder, older, but unmistakably the same design. I moved closer, drawn by horrified fascination. The notebooks on the tables were Colonel Ashford's journals, detailed records of his experiments. I opened one and began to read by the light of my guttering candle. The entries were clinical at first, describing his theories about memory and consciousness, his belief that mental illness could be cured by replacing damaged memories with healthy ones. But as I read further, the tone changed. He had begun experimenting on his wife, using the machine to try to erase her memories of some traumatic event. But instead of curing her, the process had fragmented her mind, leaving her confused, distressed, experiencing memories that were not her own. He had not stopped. He had continued experimenting, trying different settings, different durations, convinced that he could perfect the process. And when his wife's condition had deteriorated to the point where she could no longer function, he had locked her in this wing, hidden her away from the world, and continued his research. The final entries were almost illegible, written in a shaking hand. He had tried to reverse the process, to restore his wife's original memories. But something had gone catastrophically wrong. The machine had malfunctioned, there had been an electrical fire, and by the time he had reached her room, the flames were already consuming the wing. He had stood outside her locked door and listened to her scream, and he had done nothing, paralyzed by guilt and fear, and the knowledge that he had destroyed the woman he claimed to love. But there was more. In the weeks after the fire, Colonel Ashford had become convinced that his wife's consciousness had not died with her body. He wrote of seeing her in mirrors, of hearing her voice calling his name. He wrote of the machine, still functional despite the fire, still humming with an energy that felt alive and malevolent. And then I found the entry that made my hands shake so badly I nearly dropped the journal. Catherine has begun to show signs of memory contamination. When I look at her, I sometimes see her mother looking back at me. When she speaks, I sometimes hear her mother's voice. I believe the machine, damaged by the fire, has been leaking residual consciousness into the surrounding environment. My daughter is being haunted not by a ghost, but by fragments of her mother's consciousness, still preserved in the machine, still seeking a host. I must destroy the machine. I must end this before Catherine is completely consumed. But I am afraid. What if destroying the machine releases whatever is trapped inside it? What if my wife's suffering is the only thing containing a greater horror? The journal ended there. Colonel Ashford had died shortly after writing those words, according to Catherine's memories. A heart attack, the doctors had said. But I wondered if it had been something else, if the guilt and fear had simply consumed him from within. I looked at the machine, standing silent in the ruins. Was it possible? Could consciousness truly be stored in brass and glass, in electrical impulses and chemical solutions? Could Catherine's mother still be trapped inside this device, her mind fragmented and suffering, reaching out to anyone who came near? I thought of the figure I had seen at the foot of my bed, the weeping I had heard in the night. I thought of Catherine's desperation to escape, her willingness to steal another woman's life rather than remain in this house. She had not been running from Lord Hartley alone. She had been running from her mother's ghost, from the contamination spreading through her own mind. And now that contamination was in me. Catherine's memories, tangled with fragments of her mother's consciousness, all mixed together in a single skull. I reached out and touched the machine. The metal was cold beneath my fingers, but I could feel a faint vibration, a low hum that seemed to resonate in my bones. There was still power in it, still something alive in the wires and tubes. "Miss Winters," a voice said from the doorway. I spun around, nearly dropping my candle. Dr. Thorne stood there, his face pale in the dim light. He was soaked to the skin, his coat dripping water onto the charred floor. "How did you get here?" I asked. "I never left Kent," he said. "I have been staying at an inn in the village, watching the manor, waiting for an opportunity to help you. When I saw a light moving in the west wing, I knew you had found a way in." He moved closer, his eyes fixed on the machine. "Dear God," he whispered. "My father's prototype. I thought it had been destroyed." "Your father built this?" I asked. "The original design, yes. He and Colonel Ashford worked together in the early days. But they had a falling out when my father realized what Ashford intended to do with the technology. My father wanted to help people, to cure illness and ease suffering. Ashford wanted power, control over human consciousness itself. He experimented on his wife," I said. "The journals are all here. He destroyed her mind trying to cure her, and then he let her burn rather than admit what he had done." Dr. Thorne's face was grim. And Catherine inherited the contamination. Her mother's fragmented consciousness, stored in this machine, gradually infecting her own memories. No wonder she was desperate enough to do what she did. "We have to destroy it," I said. "We have to end this." But even as I said it, I felt something resist, some part of me that was not entirely mine, recoiling from the idea. "If we destroy the machine," a voice seemed to whisper in my mind, "you destroy the last trace of her. You condemn her to complete oblivion." I realized with horror that it was not my thought. It was Catherine's mother, her consciousness still clinging to existence inside the machine, inside the contaminated memories now lodged in my brain. "Eleanor," Dr. Thorne said urgently, "we need to leave this place. The machine is dangerous. The longer you are near it, the more it will influence you." But I could not move. I stood frozen, one hand still touching the cold brass, feeling the hum grow stronger, more insistent. Images flooded through my mind, memories that were not mine and not Catherine's. A woman locked in a room, screaming for help. A man standing outside the door, his face twisted with guilt and indecision. Flames crawling up the walls. The terrible certainty of abandonment, of betrayal, of dying alone while the person who was supposed to love you most did nothing. "Eleanor." Dr. Thorne grabbed my shoulders and pulled me away from the machine. The connection broke, and I gasped as if surfacing from deep water. He held me as I trembled, as the borrowed grief worked its way through me. She is still here, I whispered. Catherine's mother. Some part of her is still trapped in that machine. She has been reaching out for years, contaminating everyone who came near. First Catherine, now me. Then we free her, Dr. Thorne said. We destroy the machine and release whatever is trapped inside. But how? I asked. You said yourself that destroying it might be dangerous. He looked at the machine, then at the ruined room around us. Fire could not destroy it before, he said, but perhaps electricity can. If we overload the system, channel too much power through the circuits, we might be able to burn out whatever consciousness is stored inside. It would be a more complete destruction than mere flames. Will it hurt her? I asked. The woman trapped inside. I do not know, he admitted, but I think she has been in pain for 23 years. Whatever we do, it cannot be worse than that. I nodded, making my decision. Do it. Dr. Thorne moved to the machine, examining the connections, the wires, the strange tubes filled with liquid. I will need to access the main power source, he said, and I will need to reverse the polarity, just as Catherine did when she used my machine to transfer your consciousness. But this time, instead of transferring memory, we will be creating a feedback loop, a cascade that will destroy the stored data completely. He worked quickly, his hands steady despite the gravity of what he was attempting. I held the candle high, giving him light, and tried not to think about what would happen if this went wrong. The machine could explode. The wing could catch fire again. We could both die here, trapped in the ruins of Colonel Ashford's ambition. Ready, Dr. Thorne said finally. When I turn this key, the process will begin. We will have perhaps 30 seconds to get clear before the machine overloads. We must run. Do you understand? We must not hesitate. I understand, I said. He turned the key. The machine came alive with a sound like 1,000 voices screaming at once. The hum became a roar. The gentle vibration became a violent shaking. Light blazed from the glass tubes, painfully bright, and I felt something tear loose inside my mind. Something that had been clinging there like a drowning person clinging to a piece of driftwood. Catherine's mother's consciousness, finally and completely released. For a moment, I felt her fully, understood her completely. Her love for her daughter, her terror of her husband, her desperate attempts to hold on to herself as the machine tore her mind apart piece by piece. Her rage at being abandoned, at being allowed to burn, and beneath it all, a terrible, aching loneliness. Then she was gone, dissolving like mist in sunlight, and I was running. Dr. Thorne had grabbed my hand and was pulling me toward the door, the candle abandoned, the only light now coming from the machine as it tore itself apart. We burst through the doorway as the explosion came. The sound was deafening, a crack like lightning striking stone. Behind us, flames erupted from the ruined laboratory, but these were different from ordinary fire. They were blue-white and cold, consuming the machine and everything around it with a precision that seemed almost intelligent. We ran through the west wing, through the debris and the shadows, Dr. Thorne guiding me with sure steps. Behind us, the fire spread, but it was contained, focused, burning only what needed to be burned. When we finally stumbled out into the north corridor, gasping and coughing, I looked back and saw the flames already beginning to die. The machine was gone, and with it, the last traces of Catherine's mother's tortured consciousness. Servants were pouring into the corridor, roused by the explosion. Graves appeared, his face shocked. Lady Catherine, what has happened? There was an accident in the West Wing, Dr. Thorne said before I could speak. A gas leak, I believe. It ignited when Lady Catherine opened the door. We are fortunate the fire did not spread. Lord Hartley arrived then, wearing a dressing gown, his face thunderous. Catherine, what were you doing in the West Wing? I expressly forbade anyone from entering that area. I was searching for answers, I said, and I was surprised by the strength in my own voice. Answers about my mother's death. Answers about what my father did to her in his laboratory. Laboratory, Lord Hartley repeated, his expression suddenly wary. Yes, I found my father's journals. I found the machine he used to experiment on my mother. I found the truth about how she really died. A murmur ran through the assembled servants. I saw shock and horror on their faces, saw the way they looked at the ruined West Wing with new understanding. "Those are the ravings of a guilty mind," Lord Hartley said, but his voice had lost some of its authority. "Your father was not in his right mind toward the end. Whatever you think you found means nothing. It means everything," I said. "And I will not marry you, Lord Hartley. I will not allow you to take control of my estate so that you can bury this scandal and pretend it never happened. I will not let my mother's suffering be forgotten." "You do not have a choice," he said coldly. "The marriage contracts are signed. The wedding will proceed as planned. Then I will speak at the ceremony," I said. "I will tell everyone assembled exactly what kind of man my father was, and exactly what kind of man you are. I will create such a scandal that your political career will be destroyed. Your choice is simple. Release me from this engagement, or watch your reputation burn along with my father's." We faced each other in the corridor, surrounded by servants and smoke, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing the cost of forcing the marriage against the cost of letting me go. He was wondering if he could silence me, if he could find some way to discredit my claims. But then Victoria appeared at the top of the stairs, still in her nightgown. "Father," she said clearly, "let her go. Please, let her go before you destroy another woman's life." Edward was beside his sister, his face pale but determined. "She is right, Father. This must end." Lord Hartley looked at his children, and something shifted in his expression. For a moment, I saw something that might have been shame or regret. Then his face hardened again, and he turned away. "Very well," he said. "The engagement is terminated. I will inform my solicitor in the morning. But Catherine," he looked back at me with cold eyes, "if you speak publicly of what you found tonight, I will ensure that you are declared mentally unfit. Your estate will be placed under a conservatorship, and you will spend the rest of your life in an asylum. Do I make myself clear?" "Perfectly clear," I said. He swept away, taking his children with him. The servants dispersed slowly, whispering among themselves. Only Graves remained, looking at me with an expression I could not quite read. "Your mother would be proud, my lady," he said quietly. "She was brave, too, in her way. She tried to fight him. In the end, it destroyed her, but she tried." "Thank you, Graves," I said, my voice breaking. He bowed and withdrew, leaving Dr. Thorne and me alone in the corridor. "What will you do now?" he asked. I thought about it. With the engagement broken, I was free. Catherine's estate was mine to control. I could stay here, restore the manor, try to build a life out of the ruins. Or I could sell everything and start fresh somewhere new. But I was not truly Catherine Ashford. I was Eleanor Winters, a typist who had agreed to an experiment and lost everything. And yet I had Catherine's memories, Catherine's knowledge, Catherine's fortune. I was something new, someone who had never existed before, a blend of two lives, two identities. "I will go back to London," I said finally. "I will find Catherine, the real Catherine. And I will tell her that her mother is finally at rest, that the contamination is gone, that she is free of the weight she carried all her life." "And then," Dr. Thorne asked, "and then I will decide who I want to be. Not Eleanor Winters anymore, perhaps. Not Catherine Ashford either. Someone new. Someone of my own making." He smiled, and there was warmth in it and hope. "I would like to help you with that, if you will allow me. I feel responsible for what happened. I want to make amends." I took his hand. "You already have, Cornelius. You helped me when I had no one else. You stood by me even when it was dangerous. That is more than amends. That is friendship." "Is that all it is?" he asked softly. I looked at him, at his gray-green eyes and his gentle smile, and I felt something warm unfold in my chest. Something that was entirely mine, not borrowed, not contaminated, not confused. It was small and fragile, but it was real. I do not know yet, I said honestly. I am still learning who I am, but I would like to find out, and I would like you to be there while I do. He raised my hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Then I will be, he said, for as long as you wish. We walked out of the manor together as dawn was breaking over Kent. Behind us, the west wing smoldered, but the fire was contained, controlled, burning away the past without consuming the future. The rest of the manor stood solid and waiting, ready to be whatever I decided to make of it. I did return to London. I did find Catherine, living quietly in a modest flat under the name Eleanor Winters. She looked different than I remembered, my face transformed by freedom and peace. When I told her what had happened, when I explained about the machine and her mother and the contamination that had plagued her for so long, she wept. But they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of release. She did not want to return to being Catherine Ashford. That life had nearly destroyed her. But she thanked me for freeing her mother's trapped consciousness, for ending the cycle of suffering that had poisoned the Ashford family for a generation. As for me, I kept Catherine's name and her fortune. I used both to establish a foundation for women fleeing difficult marriages, for women who needed a second chance at life. Dr. Thorne Cornelius helped me, becoming not just my partner in the work, but gradually my partner in life. We never married. After everything I had been through, the idea of legal ownership, of one person having power over another, was intolerable. But we built a life together nonetheless, a life based on choice and equality and respect. We continued his research into memory and consciousness, but always ethically, always with consent, always in service of healing rather than control. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I would touch the place on my scalp where the machine's crown had rested, and I would remember being two different people, living two different lives. Eleanor Winters, the desperate typist. Catherine Ashford, the trapped heiress. And now this new person, neither and both, forged in the crucible of impossible circumstances. I never regretted answering that advertisement. Even knowing the price, even understanding the cost, I would do it again. Because in losing my life, I gained a larger one. In losing myself, I found something more authentic than what I had been before. And sometimes, very rarely, when I looked in mirrors, I thought I saw three faces looking back at me. Eleanor, Catherine, and a third woman, older, sad-eyed, grateful. Catherine's mother, finally at peace, watching over the daughter she had never stopped loving, and the stranger who had helped set her free. The past leaves marks on places, Mrs. Albright had said. Some sorrows are too great to simply disappear, but they can be transformed. They can be honored and released. They can become something other than pain. That is what I learned in Queen Victoria's reign, when I was a shy typist who tested a mind device and woke in another woman's life. That is the truth I carry with me still. That we are all made of memories, borrowed and earned, painful and precious. And that who we become is not determined by where we start, but by the choices we make when we discover who we truly are. I chose to be someone who freed ghosts, someone who helped other women trapped in impossible situations, someone who loved carefully and lived deliberately and never forgot the price of desperation. I chose to be someone who mattered, not because of birth or fortune or beauty, but because of what I did with the strange, stolen, miraculous life I had been given. And in the end, that was enough.